Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 17th of February. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information for your community and village by listening to Marine VHF, NOAA Weather Radio, or logging on to weather.gov/Alaska. You can call us on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube in the afternoon. Of course, you get your daily afternoon map briefing around 4 o'clock. That's nice in mobile form, too, if you want to check that out on your mobile device. And many of our websites are working better and better with the cell signal, whether you're in the bush or you're on the road or a rail system. Things are getting better and better for social media and for connectivity to the Weather Service. So check that out if you haven't in a while. Let's talk about what's going on first out in the west and around Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound. An awful lot of weather occurring over the Seward Peninsula and around the lower Yukon Valley. The numbers I've painted on here over the red shaded areas are snowfall expectations or forecasts as we go into the next 24 to 36 hours. You could be seeing as much as 3 to 5 inches on the western tip of the Seward Peninsula to St. Lawrence Island, where blizzard warnings are in effect, and winter storm warnings elsewhere in the red shaded regions, and as much as 10 to 16 inches of snow around Ambler and the south facing slopes of the Brooks Range, including the upper Noatak and Kobuk valleys there. A lot of snow is headed your way. South of that, 8 to 12 inches around the lower to middle Yukon Valley there, and westward into the Norton Sound region, 6 to 8 inches of snow. That does include areas around Nome and around the interior of the Seward Peninsula. It doesn't look like Kotzebue Sound coastline areas, including Shishmaref or Kotzebue at this point, are involved in any type of warnings or advisories, but we'll see some snow falling in that region as we go into the next several days. Now, south of that, for the yellow shaded areas from Hooper Bay eastward and up the river toward McGrath and into the upper Kuskokwim Valley, of course, and into Grayling, I should say, for the Yukon Valley, and the upper Kuskokwim for the Kuskokwim Valley itself around McGrath. Those are freezing rain advisories. You're only looking at about 1/10 of an inch or so of actual freezing rain or ice, but in places like McGrath, you could see as much as 7 inches of snow in addition to that freezing rain potential. So there's a little bit of a variation right here on the southern end of the storm. Everything north of that is expecting to be snowfall, and some of that will come down hard and heavy as we get into tomorrow and Wednesday afternoon. So plan on additional snowfall falling from this point on. In the meantime, as you well know, out in the west, it has been pretty mild, especially around places like Bettles today. And while 28 may not be terribly warm, it is a new record high. That is 26 from 1993 is the old record. 28 is today's high temperature. Other places were pretty close to setting records there. If you're looking at Anchorage and you're saying, wow, it was pretty nice. I was walking around in shorts, as I saw many folks doing today. The temperature reached up to about 44. Depending on which record book you're looking at, one of those records goes all the way back to 1920, where it hit 45. So in some places you might say it was a new record high. If you're just looking at the records from Ted Stevens, that number goes back into the 1980s there, and again, it was pretty close to record setting. So either way you cut it, a very warm day across many parts of Alaska. Out across south and western Alaska, you can see low pressure working northward there as it's pulling in that warm and wet air across the lower Yukon and Kuskokwim deltas and moving that northward. It reached places like Bettles today. And now, with colder air wrapping into the system, you've got enough potential for some pretty heavy snowfall again across the lower and upper Noatak and Kobuk valleys there. That promises to push out at least about 6 to 8 inches of snow, and more likely, again, 10 to 16 inches of snow on that higher end. So that's the forecast potential there. Another wave of low pressure across the North Pacific, seen spiraling here, slowly meandering eastward. Now that this storm system has gotten out of the way, we can get the main storm track back in motion across the North Pacific and see if what's out west heads into the Gulf. As we look out across east and southeastern Alaska, you can see the next wave of warm and wet air moving northward on that southerly trajectory. As you'll see in the upper air maps here in just a few minutes, a broad south flow working over the eastern Gulf, and another round of rain working upward towards southeastern Alaska in the coming days, and another batch of clouds working over south central, also coming our way as we head into the midweek. As you look at the rest of the satellite view, you'll notice the weather system here across the west working right over Bethel. The circulation is just east of Nunivak Island earlier this afternoon and will likely travel right over the Seward Peninsula. So the greatest amount of lift with this will head over Norton Sound and into the upper Kobuk Valley, and thus the pretty decent upslope flow going right into the western Brooks Range, and a really good setup for some heavy accumulating snow in those regions that could total to more of a foot and a half. Now for the Arctic coast, no warnings or watches for you just yet, but it does look like you may see a few inches of snow with this. The frontal boundary lifting northward with this is trying to stall out, so painted this as a stationary boundary at this point, but you could probably make similar arguments to call it a warm front as well, because it certainly is. There's a lot of warm and wet air lifting northward. Pockets of rainfall across the YK today, and you already saw a little bit of snow across the Seward coastline up toward the Yukon region, as well as St. Mary's. Low pressure across the eastern Gulf only at 1,004 millibars, which is considerably higher than anything we were talking about at this point last week. That was the most recent storm, and now at 986 millibars just off the YK. As we get into tonight, high pressure is setting up across south central, so if you didn't manage to get things chipped out or you still have some frozen areas on the walk, chances are those are going to get a lot more slick as we head into the next 12 hours or so. Temperatures are already beginning to drop off fairly quickly with the sun going below the horizon. Low pressure across the eastern Gulf, 1,001 millibars, showing warmer air still trying to lift northward toward Yakutat, and some pockets of heavier rainfall associated with that. But just to the south, a lot of dry air already moving through southeastern Alaska with a ridge of high pressure that extends into the Pacific Northwest. That hasn't stopped yet, and as this system travels northward slowly, this will probably wrap up on itself fairly quickly. Back to the west, pockets of blowing snow, but the main issue is probably going to be the falling snow there for the Kobuk and Noatak valleys. But over the St. Lawrence Island and the western tip of the Seward Peninsula, that could be blizzard conditions for you. While there may not be a whole lot of falling snow, it will be the near zero visibility that really causes the main issues there, with gusts upwards of 50 miles per hour. So prepare for some pretty nasty conditions there, at least for the next 12, 18, even 24 hours in some cases, as conditions move up toward that blizzard level and then continue on with very poor visibility into Wednesday. Northward, you'll see blowing and drifting snow across the Brooks Range, and southward in Bristol Bay, you're still looking at some warm and wet air that may mix in with snow. We'll still have some of that around Prince William Sound as well. Snow showers for the Copper River Basin and around the Alcan as that wave of low pressure, again, kind of mixes up on itself, so we're not going to have a true cold or warm front anymore. But there will still be opportunities for rainfall across southeast and across Prince William Sound toward Yakutat. Most of south central is looking pretty dry by Wednesday, but out to the west around the Alaska Range, expect snow showers to continue on and off. The main focus for accumulating snow will be generally north of the Yukon Valley, Norton Sound, Seward Peninsula, and into the Chukchi Sea coast around St. Lawrence Island and south and west. And then we're looking at a lot of heavy stratus. Areas around St. Paul may still be seeing some snow showers for Wednesday and Wednesday afternoon, and some areas of rain and snow showers for the central and eastern Aleutians and parts of the Alaska Range. For Thursday, it looks like that frontal wave kind of lifts a little bit further northward. It's starting to fall apart, hasn't just yet. Across the southwest coast, you have rain and some areas of rain and snow mixed together. Again, around the Pribilofs would be one of the more likely spots. Around the central and western Aleutians, plan for some light rainfall there. High pressure is still in charge of the western Alaska Range now, south central, and some parts of the interior, including the middle Tanana Valley. With that, we should see the clouds erode substantially, and you'll see the sunshine, but it probably won't be as warm as it has been today. Most of that for many places across the west and across south central is mainly due to the wind direction, which will be shut down substantially with this weather pattern. Across southeast, periods of rain and snow will continue. None of that seems extraordinarily heavy. Out across the north, what's left of that original surge of warm air is now transitioning into more of a northwesterly onshore flow, and with that comes better chance for colder air, a better chance for some snow showers, and again more of a breezy situation east of Barrow and into the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast, something you've been accustomed to really for most of the winter. Here's a look at southeast temperatures then from today. A fairly mild day, not as warm as it was a couple days ago though. 40s and 50s all the way into the southern half of southeast. You saw Ketchikan and Craig and Klawock all nearing that 50-degree mark for a time today. 41 in Hyder, lower 40s around Juneau today. Haines and Skagway also pleasantly mild. 44 around Yakutat, 30s and 40s for Prince William Sound. Seward was 41, Homer was 44 at the 3 o'clock hour, 39 around Kenai. Anchorage was 43. Around Glen Ellen and Gulkana, we saw temperatures that were reaching into the 30s today, with Northway sitting at 18. Eagle was 38. In the Middle Tanana Valley, temperatures there around Fairbanks right at 32, with Healy and Greeley both reaching 40 degrees by mid-afternoon. It was 19 in Fort Yukon, 27 in AKwx Pass, and temperatures were hovering above zero for Kaktovik, while they were below zero from Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse westward toward Barrow and Wainwright. And you got around the Horn into Kivalina, and temperatures soared to 26 as that warm air rushed up the western coast. Over the Seward Peninsula, temperatures actually got up above freezing for a while. Nome was sitting at 31 though, 33 in Unalakleet, with Galena and Ruby. Temperatures there all in the lower 30s. Areas northward were even warmer. And you can see McGrath was making it up to 37 by mid-afternoon. Grayling also in the mid-30s, about the same there in Bethel, 34 around Nunivak Island. St. Lawrence Island only 10 though. Southwest saw temps in the mid to upper 30s. King Salmon was 44. St. Paul and St. George in the lower 30s, and 30s and 40s as well for the Alaska Peninsula, with Port Hayden closer to 39. Dutch Harbor on Alaska made it to 40, and you see areas out in the west and central chain were hovering in the lower to mid-30s, but they were above freezing as well. Now, overnight low temperatures will drop into the single digits and low teens for many in the eastern interior to the west, 20s and 30s there. Several communities will be above freezing tonight, so again, watch the ice. 26 in Nome, 1 below in Barrow, 37 in Kodiak, mid-30s for the peninsula, 35 in Unalaska and Dutch Harbor and southeast, also above freezing. High temperatures tomorrow back in the mid to upper 40s, many areas in the south probably getting close to 50 degrees. South Central above freezing, Kodiak 42. Fairbanks up to 21, 18 in Fort Yukon. The Arctic coast going above freezing, or actually above zero, let's say that right. Low to mid-teens for many, Kaktovik 16, Nome 29, and Southwest back in the lower to mid-30s with Bethel at 34, King Salmon up to 40, and Southwest in the Alaska Peninsula in the lower 40s with Dutch Harbor back to 40 degrees, St. Paul only 33. Flying weather now. Yeah, that's a mess. IFR conditions across the northern sections of Norton Sound, Kotzebue Sound, the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, all the way up the Yukon River Valley and the Yukon Delta coastline itself. Patchy IFR for southeast, MVFR for just about all of the western Alaska Range, Nulato Hills, and the Brooks Range, as well as the Bering Sea coast. So plan on some yuck weather tomorrow. AKwx Pass, expect IFR conditions there, and for Adigan Pass, Lake Clark and Merrill Pass may see some improvements during the afternoon. Rainy Pass, we expect MVFR late in the day. Same goes for Windy Pass for your Wednesday. Isabel Pass may see some big improvements quickly during the midday hours. Mentasta Pass, we expect VFR conditions by late in the day. Tanita Pass will probably hold over at MVFR through most of your Wednesday, and Portage Pass should also see the fog lift fairly quickly in the morning, heading for VFR. Chilkoot and White Pass, we still expect some rain in the region. We'll call MVFR for this point. Freezing levels, look for 2, 4, even 6,000 foot freezing lines right there across Chilkoot and White Pass up toward Yakutat, and a very tight gradient there as warm air is still hovering over southeast. But the warm air is retreating from the west coast now, and the surface freezing line there is starting to drop southward now with a return for some southerly flow. Now, I left the surface freezing lines on here for surface pressure lines on here for icing, so don't get too used to this here. This kind of helps me draw it in. But above 3,000 feet, expect occasional moderate across the west. Again, with icing and heavy snow production, there's no doubt you're going to have some trouble flying in that region tomorrow. Out across areas north and west of the Pribilofs, above 1,000 feet, still some light to isolated moderate there, and also some of that wrapping into the central chain. Across southeast, you'll have to go a little bit higher, above 5,000 feet, to run into at least some isolated moderate and maybe some occasional moderate the further north you go, especially into northwestern British Columbia and southern Yukon. The jet stream is showing our pronounced trough of low pressure that has shifted a little bit back to the west. You can see that hovering across the western Bering, but still over the North Pacific with the fastest moving winds way out to sea there, but those are still running around 150 knots. And we have a little bit of the ridge still working in across the Alaska area, and a ridge of high pressure across the west coast. Not as pronounced as it was in recent days, but it's still there. It's just being a little bit interrupted by that low pressure wave there. Out across the west, again, more of a trough. Across the Bering Sea, 30 to 35 knots, 25 to 40 knots across the North Pacific as we have an inverted trough there working across the central chain. South and westerly flow across the Gulf of Alaska. Wind speeds across the interior running 15 to 30 knots or so. At 3,000 feet, we still have our trough controlling the weather with that southerly flow working across the Yukon Valley and the west coast, anywhere from 15 to 30 knots, 20 knots across the Arctic coast. Southwesterly flow predominant across most of southeast there. A little bit of a ridge trying to build in south of Kodiak Island. And we see south and easterly flow coming in across the central and eastern chain, also fairly light at 25 to 35 knots. So between visibility and turbulence, it'll be the lower and middle Yukon valleys as well as the Noatak and Kobuk valleys tomorrow that really see some tricky trouble for flying. Anywhere below 6,000 feet could reach occasional moderate. Below 6,000 feet as you get to Nunivak Island westward toward the Pribilofs, and below 4,000 feet for at least a little bit of chop for the central and eastern chain and the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula. And watch for a little bit of chop from Port Alexander southward toward Craig and Klawock as you head into Wednesday. Let's look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with an update on the sea ice edge and your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
What is it about the ocean that attracts so many of us? We like to play in it, get our food from it, build our houses near it, and gaze out at it. Our economy depends on the goods that come in and go out through our major ports. The ocean makes us feel good, contributes to our economic growth, and we like to be close to it. It's not surprising then that almost half of our population lives near the coastline. But working and playing along the coast is not always serene. Powerful coastal storms can raise the water level significantly, 20 feet or even more, causing loss of life, destroying homes, businesses, and property. Hurricanes like Katrina and Ike showed us firsthand the risks that coastal communities face.
It was 32 feet. We went through the first floor to the second floor, through the attic. The water came up to us like here on the roof. And we talking about swimming to the tree. And luckily, it subsided.
With ocean waters warming and sea levels rising, it is likely that the U.S. will encounter future storms equally as harmful and costly. And with so many people living along the coast, the stakes are getting higher each year. Storm destruction is rarely limited to lost lives and property. Instruments collecting water level and meteorological information must be located in harm's way so they can deliver data critical for flooding forecasts and emergency evacuations. But all too often, these stations are damaged or destroyed during the very times we need them. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, has responded to this dilemma by strengthening some of its storm tide stations. Known as NOAA Sentinels of the Coast, these platforms are single-pile, 4 feet in diameter structures that stand at least 20 feet above the sea surface and are driven 60 to 100 feet into the seafloor for stability. For over 200 years, NOAA has monitored the rise and fall of tides using the latest technology. Beginning with human observers in the early 19th century, NOAA has harnessed technology to operate its network of tide stations that automatically collect accurate and reliable data every 6 minutes. Today, NOAA maintains more than 200 permanent water level observing stations. NOAA's goal is to ensure that the public has advance notice based on the most accurate and up-to-date storm tide and meteorological information. This is only possible, however, when the tide stations operate throughout the storm. So Sentinels are designed to withstand a Category 4 hurricane, with winds up to 155 miles per hour and storm surges of nearly 20 feet above normal. Planning, design, construction, and operation required a team of experts in surveying, engineering, pile installation, oceanography, quality control, and web expertise. With new technology, NOAA is better meeting the needs of coastal communities. Lives are often at stake during the 24 hours before a major storm. Once floodwaters begin to rise, it becomes critical to know which evacuation routes are passable.
Having this kind of immediate real-time data up close that our community has access to is critical for us in our day-to-day operations.
Each Sentinel will report real-time water level and meteorological observations. Water level measurements are precisely referenced to ensure that coastal communities can make informed decisions to elevate housing, build levees, and plan evacuation routes. In addition to storm tide reporting, the products that result from NOAA's instruments also contribute to safe navigation, accurate charting, marine engineering, sea level change monitoring, and other important activities.
Before we send crews out, we always check the tide. ice because being in South Louisiana, you have to make sure your barges and boats can get in before you can even begin your work. So the tide information is very important.
The first Sentinels were constructed along the Gulf Coast at Calcasieu Pass, Amarada Pass, and Shell Beach in Louisiana, and Bay Waveland in Mississippi. Hurricanes Gustav and Ike tested the Sentinels within weeks of installation. Standing strong, they delivered storm tide data, which were used by emergency responders as well as thousands of coastal residents. More Sentinels are planned and will be built at exposed coastal locations as funding becomes available. Other stations in less exposed areas will be elevated above storm surge range on substantial structures. Coastal communities must be ever vigilant. Even tropical storms can deal a massive blow to many residents, especially storms that make landfall on a high tide. Sentinels are designed to serve the over 150 million residents of coastal communities, planning for the worst and hoping that we never need those plans. However, if the unthinkable happens, NOAA Sentinels will be there standing tall, providing a safe haven for instruments that are vital to planning for and responding to nature's fury.
Here's a look at the latest sea ice edge now, and if you've been paying attention to its proximity to St. Paul, you probably noticed things have pulled back just a little bit. No doubt, with all the warm weather passing over, that happened fairly quickly. And now the leading edge of the area that could have ice strips in it is about 25 nautical miles there, just to the north of St. Paul. So some big changes there that we were talking about over the last several days, and there they are for right now. There's even some open water there inside of Bristol Bay. Here's a larger view of the situation. The areas just outside of Kuskokwim Bay have a little bit of open water there, but with the leading edge there is just still south, so we're going to see that with an ice notification there inside of the marine forecast region that we're talking about here in just a few minutes. Also, the ice continues to sit just south of Calgan Island in Cook Inlet. So it's still wintertime, and we'll still expect to see some changes as we go forward. Now, as we look at southeast, look for southerly flow from south of Sitka to the Dixon entrance around 20 knots with 10-foot seas. Northerlies inside the central and northern sections of the inner waterways there about 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. Southeasterly still going over Clarence Strait around 25 knots. As far as Thursday goes, the winds will diminish there across some of the southern inner coast. Look for more of an onshore push coming in from Yakutat down toward Gustavus and Cross Sound and Sitka. South and southwesterly flow begins to develop there, still running around 15 to 25 knots from south to north. Across South Central, look for a variable flow and across the northern Cook Inlet there over the ice. Just south of Calgan Island, you'll start to see some water open up there. 3-foot seas with a southeasterly flow on Wednesday. West and southwesterlies across the western Gulf with northwesterly winds inside of Prince William Sound running around 10 knots and picking up once you get outside of Montague Island. That's 20 knots with an 8-foot sea. Look for more of a variable flow inside of Prince William Sound on Thursday. Westerlies continuing to work across the northern Gulf. Southeasterlies coming into the eastern Barrens. 20 knots with a 6-foot sea. To the west of that, that's more of a northeasterly flow at 20 knots with a 5-foot sea. And easterlies on either side of Kodiak Island still running around 30 knots or so for Thursday. For the Alaska Peninsula, a south and westerly flow continues to work over Bristol Bay. There's 2-foot seas inside of the ice-free waters in Bristol Bay, 5-foot seas a little bit further south down the coast, and 15 to 25 knot winds on the Pacific side of the peninsula. Look for those to become a little more east and southeasterly with time on Thursday, 12 to 14-foot seas there, and easterlies also on the Bering Sea coast side with 7 to 8-foot seas by Thursday. For the Aleutians, a north and westerly flow from Kiska westward at 15 to 25 knots. Northeasterlies from Nikolsky to Adak, and also on the Pacific side, 25 knots there, 9 to 10-foot seas. Look for more of a southwesterly shift north of Unalaska and Nikolsky on Wednesday. That should wrap around to more of an easterly flow on Thursday, 30 knots there. Also looking at the same conditions on the south side, but with 13-foot seas, and more of a northerly push there for the central and western chain, 20 to 30 knots with 12-foot seas south of Adak, Atka, and Nikolsky. For the west coast, a northerly flow cutting across St. Lawrence Island. Some of that, again, could produce blizzard conditions as we get into Wednesday. South and westerly flow on either side of Nunivak Island, 20 to 25 knots, and westerlies for the Pribilofs with a 7-foot sea on Wednesday. That will become a northeasterly flow with an 8-foot sea on Thursday, up to 25 knots there. East and northeasterly winds still picking up across St. Lawrence Island and the northern Yukon coast and Norton Sound. Look for the winds, again, to create poor visibility, perhaps down to 0 miles as we get into St. Lawrence Island and the blizzard warning there in effect now. Look for northerlies cutting into Kotzebue Sound, 20 to 25 knots for Wednesday. An offshore flow from Prudhoe Bay toward Barrow and Point Lay around 10 to 20 knots at its highest. You'll see winds switch to more of a southwesterly direction from Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik on Thursday, and more of an onshore flow developing for Point Hope, Cape Lisburn, Point Lay, all the way up toward Wainwright, and even a little bit around Barrow at 15 to 20 knots or so. Winds just outside of Kotzebue Sound should remain fairly light at 10 knots. Here's a recap of tonight's weather. Quite a lot going on surrounding low pressure that's been working across the Alaska Peninsula, now up the western coast, with a warm and wet air and quite a bit of lift running into some of the western mountains, Nulato Hills and Noatak and Kobuk Valleys, as well as the west parts of the Brooks Range and the south-facing slopes there. There's high potential for accumulating snow. Some of that may be very heavy and will focus the most snow likely around the upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys there. In those regions, you might see as much as 10 to 16 inches of snow. For the lesser amounts of snow, expect the western tip of the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island to pick up somewhere around 3 to 5 inches of snow. However, that comes with blizzard warnings and some very strong and gusty winds from the north and east that could gust upwards of 50 miles per hour, bringing visibility down to about 0 at times. For the areas on the south side of the storm, you'll see your snow mix in with a chance for some freezing rain. The good news is a lot of that freezing rain should be fairly light from St. Mary's eastward toward Grayling and into McGrath as well for the upper Kuskokwim Valley. You should expect probably about 1/10 of an inch of ice with the snow or less. Now in places like McGrath, you may also see as much as 7 inches of snow. Elsewhere, you're looking at about 6 to 8 inches of snow. That includes areas around Nome, so good for the race preps there that are coming up very soon. In the meantime, periods of rain and snow will continue across the northern Gulf Coast. Some pockets of clearing tonight and a quick refreeze across south central as we head into the next 24 hours. Snow continues in the north and west heading into Thursday, and look for some drier weather across southwest by Thursday. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.